Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'm flying solo this week. I'll be delivering both the Washington Report and the call to action. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate will both return Monday. The House will stay in session through Wednesday, while the Senate will stay in session through Thursday. Last week in the House came back on Monday and took up and passed two bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, the House took up and passed a rule governing floor consideration of three resolutions. On Wednesday, the House took up and passed the first, H.J. Res. 61, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of the rules submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency relating to national emission standards for pollutants rubber tire manufacturing. Then the House took up and passed H.J. Res. 42, providing for congressional disapproval of the rules submitted by the Department of Energy relating to energy conservation program for appliance standards, certification requirements, labeling requirements, and enforcement provisions for certain consumer products and commercial equipment. Then the House took up and rejected a motion to table H. Res. 189. That's a resolution censuring Representative Al Green of Texas. On Thursday, the House took up and passed S.J. Res. 11, a CRA resolution of disapproval of the rules submitted by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management relating to protection of marine archaeological resources. Then the House took up and passed H. Res. 189, censuring Representative Al Green of Texas. The vote was 224 to 198, with 10 Democrats crossing party lines to join the Republicans in censuring the Texas Democrat for his outrageously disrespectful behavior at Tuesday evening's joint session of Congress. And then they were done. This week in the House will return today with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 9 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the House will consider 3 bills pursuant to a rule. The first will be H.R. 1159, the Pandemic Unemployment Fraud Enforcement Act. The second will be H.J. Res. 25, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of the rules submitted by the Internal Revenue Service relating to gross proceeds reporting by brokers that regularly provide services effectuating digital asset sales. And the third will be a continuing resolution about which we will speak more in a moment. The House will wrap up its work on Wednesday so the Democrats can hold their annual issues retreat later in the week. Now, before you go getting upset that Democrats get to pause the work of the House to go to their annual issue retreat, let me remind you that Republicans already paused the work of the House to go off to their annual issues retreat earlier this year. Now, if you want to get upset that the two teams don't arrange to have their annual issues retreats at the same time on the same day, so they only have to pause the work of the House for 1 day rather than 2, well, by all means, have at it. I've been working in this town for more than 40 years now, and I have yet to run into anyone who's been able to give me a reasonable answer to that question. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to confirm Linda McMahon to serve as Secretary of Education. Then the Senate took up a motion to end debate on S9, a bill to provide that for purposes of determining compliance with Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 in athletics, sex shall be recognized based solely on a person's reproductive biology and genetics at birth. In other words, this was a bill to protect women and girls from being hurt by men playing in women's sports. Every Democrat in the chamber voted against ending debate. That is, they voted to continue the filibuster. So the motion failed by a vote of 51 to 45. On Tuesday, the Senate agreed to a motion to proceed to SJ3, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of the rules submitted by the Internal Revenue Service relating to gross proceeds reporting by brokers that regularly provide services effectuating digital asset sales. Then the Senate passed that joint resolution. On Wednesday, the Senate agreed to end debate on the nomination of Todd Blanche to be Deputy Attorney General. Then the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. On Thursday, the Senate agreed to end debate on the nomination of Troy Edgar to serve as Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Then the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Lori Chavez DeRemer to serve as Secretary of Labor. And then the Senate voted to end debate on S-331, a bill to amend the Controlled Substances Act with respect to the scheduling of fentanyl-related substances. And then they were done. This week in the Senate will come back today with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the nomination of Lori Chavez DeRemer to serve as Secretary of Labor. Then the Senate will vote on a motion to proceed to S-331, the Halt Fentanyl Act, with a voice vote possible. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see votes on the nominations of Stephen Bradbury to serve as Deputy Secretary of Transportation and Abigail Slater to serve as the Assistant Attorney General. Now, Elon Musk calls Social Security a Ponzi scheme. On several occasions in recent weeks, Elon Musk, the world's richest man and the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, has referred to Social Security as a Ponzi scheme. This has upset the left to a degree unlike anything I've witnessed in quite some time. Seriously, it's almost as if they're more upset that he calls it a Ponzi scheme than they are at the thought that President Trump might try to cut Social Security benefits. Now, before we go any further, let me be clear. President Trump has said since he first ran for president back in 2016 that he will not cut Social Security or Medicare benefits. He's gone even further, in fact, saying he would never touch either program. Now, back to Musk and Social Security. Is it properly described as a Ponzi scheme or not? According to the Securities and Exchange Commission's investor.gov website, quote, a Ponzi scheme is an investment fraud that pays existing investors with funds collected from new investors. Ponzi scheme organizers often promise to invest your money and generate high returns with little or no risk. But in many Ponzi schemes, the fraudsters do not invest the money. Instead, they use it to pay those who invested earlier and may keep some for themselves, end quote. Now, here's how MSNBC described the workings of Social Security. Quote, it is not some kind of black box in which money sloshes around mysteriously, but a simple pay-as-you-go program, wherein current workers, via the payroll tax, fund payouts for retirees and disabled people. As the Social Security Administration explains, quote, in 2025, when you work, about 85 cents of every Social Security tax dollar you pay goes to a trust fund. This fund pays monthly benefits to current retirees and their families, and to surviving spouses and children of workers who have died. About 15 cents goes to a trust fund that pays benefits to people with disabilities and their families, end quote, end quote. Note what the Social Security Administration does not say. It does not say that any of your Social Security tax dollars go to any kind of investment account, whether with your name on it or not. Instead, says the Social Security Administration, about 100% of your tax dollars goes to two trust funds to pay benefits right now. Nothing is being set aside for you or invested for you or anything like that. Money from current workers is being used to pay for current benefit recipients. The money comes in the front door and goes right out the back door. Now, the scheme works as long as there are enough new workers to fund the retirement benefits of current beneficiaries. But what happens when there aren't enough workers paying in the system to pay for all the benefits going to the retirees? Well, that's where we are now. Following the 1983 bipartisan Social Security financing deal, the Social Security Trust Fund ran a surplus for decades. Beginning in the early 2010s, though, Social Security began paying out more than it took in every year. Why? Because 2011 was the year the first baby boomer turned 65 and retired. The baby boom generation is the biggest generation in American history. And for 65 years, it's moved through life like a small rodent that's been swallowed by a snake. It was just one giant demographic bulge, moving forward constantly. And in 2011, those who were born in 1946 turned 65 years old. And for the 20 years between 2011 and 2031, we're in this demographic vortex. It's only going to get worse. On the retiree side of the equation, people are living longer now. On the current worker side, we're no longer replenishing ourselves as we once were. That is, birth rates have dropped significantly. So we don't have as many workers coming in and paying into the retirement system. Absent congressional action, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to become insolvent in 2035. And when that happens, if Congress has not acted before then, retirees will receive only about 83% of their full benefits. So the next time you hear Elon Musk call Social Security a Ponzi scheme, you'll know what he's talking about. Now, Trump addresses Congress. Since taking the oath of office 6 weeks ago, President Trump has moved so quickly to put his stamp on government policies that one could be forgiven for having missed an action or two that he's taken. Not to worry. In his Tuesday evening speech last week to a joint session of Congress, he opened with a quick recap. And what a recap it was. As Trump spoke of his actions in office, nearly 100 executive orders signed and more than 400 executive actions taken, he demonstrated how important is the choice Americans make every 4 years. In just 43 days, he reminded us, he's issued executive orders declaring a national emergency on our southern border, deployed the U.S. military and border patrol to end the invasion of our country, frozen all federal hiring, all new federal regulations, and all foreign aid, terminated what he called the ridiculous Green New Scam, withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord, the World Health Organization, and the UN Human Rights Council, ended former President Biden's environmental restrictions, including his, quote, insane electric vehicle mandate, end quote, and directed that for every new regulation, 10 old regulations must first be eliminated. And that was just at the top of the speech. Trump spoke for 99 minutes, breaking Bill Clinton's record for the longest presidential speech to a joint session of Congress. Yet he left his audience hungry for more. An example, an early applause line echoed a taunt from the campaign trail. Quote, the media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation to secure the border, he said, pausing with Johnny Carson's sense of comedic timing. But it turns out all we really needed was a new president. Cue a wildly boisterous response from the Republican side of the aisle, and assuredly from the vast majority of the home viewing audience. In fact, the Republican side of the aisle got quite a good cardio workout Tuesday evening, with members of Congress regularly jumping to their feet for standing ovations. The Democrat side of the aisle, by contrast, sat stony-faced and glum, even through Trump's introduction of his special guests, including a 13-year-old brain cancer survivor whose greatest wish was to become a police officer and who was made an agent of the Secret Service right there at the speech, or the high school senior, the son, grandson, and great-grandson of veterans, mind you, whose law enforcement officer father was slain in the line of duty and whose wish to be accepted at West Point was granted by Trump on the spot. How anyone, even as great a political opponent of Trump as California's newest U.S. Senator Adam Schiff, could sit on his hands and maintain the straight-ahead stare, stone face, while the rest of the chamber applauded wildly for those guests, was remarkable. The political theater, too, was remarkable. Trump may reveal himself to be one of our greatest presidents because of the depth of his understanding of the television medium and how to use it to his political advantage. It is said that John F. Kennedy, young and dashing, was the first president to master the television medium. Trump's understanding of the medium eclipses Kennedy's. Trump's mastery of the medium is so great that he even used the Kennedy in his cabinet, the nephew of the slain president, no less, to score points with a jab at his opponents. Perhaps the most important line of the night was when President Trump said, quote, and in the near future, I want to do what hasn't been done in 24 years, balance the federal budget, end quote. The Tea Party movement has been working for a balanced budget since its birth 16 years ago last week. Thanks to the efforts of the Department of Government Efficiency, finding all kinds of wasteful spending, $22 billion from HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens, $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma, $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants, for example, we can get a good start on balancing the budget. This was easily the best of the 5 State of the Union type speeches Trump has delivered to the Congress. His delivery was disciplined, his tone grave when called for, and respectful throughout. His text was organized, and his choice of guests to illustrate the larger points he wished to make would have made Mike Deaver, the inventor of the Sputnik, envious. Of course, the task of delivering on a speech like this is made easier when there's so much good news to report. Whether we're talking about the success in shutting down the flow of illegal aliens across the border, down to historic lows in just the first month, or in unleashing the American economy by removing large swaths of the regulatory burden attached to it, or finally, through his Department of Government Efficiency, taking a chainsaw to the established bureaucracies of the swamp, Trump has demonstrated the power of a determined and dynamic executive, exactly what the founders foresaw. Quote, "Energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government," wrote Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 70. By Hamilton's standard, Trump's government is good. Very good. Now to government funding. 5 days from today, government funding expires, and we'll see a temporary partial government shutdown if the Congress doesn't pass some kind of funding bill before then. Despite talking since December, the last time a funding bill came before the Congress, appropriators in both parties have not been able to come to agreement on a funding bill for the rest of the fiscal year that ends on September 30. The issue, as we discussed last week, is not the overall spending levels or even the spending levels for any particular program. What the Democrats and Republicans cannot agree on is this. Democrats insist on including unprecedented language in the funding bill that would bind President Trump to spend all the money that's appropriated on the purposes and programs for which the funding was appropriated. They insist on this because they see Trump cutting funding for all kinds of programs that have already had funds appropriated previously. Republicans refuse to accede to the demand, saying it's unprecedented and unconstitutional. Neither side will blink. So instead of coming to agreement on an omnibus spending bill that honors the work of the appropriations committees in both houses, the Congress will instead take last year's funding bill, make a few tweaks here and there, and vote on it again. On Saturday, the House GOP leadership released the text of its 6-month continuing resolution. It's just 99 pages long, and it raises defense spending from the 2024 level by $6 billion, while it cuts domestic spending by $13 billion. It includes additional funding for immigrations and customs enforcement to help in the deportation effort, and it maintains a freeze on $20 billion in special funding for the IRS. The bill does not contain any earmarks, despite requests by members. Shortly after its release, President Trump publicly endorsed the legislation and called on all Republicans in the House and Senate to vote for it. In a Saturday Truth Social post, he wrote, quote, "The House and Senate have put together, under the circumstances, a very good funding bill, CR. All Republicans should vote, please, yes, next week. Great things are coming for America, and I'm asking you all to give us a few months to get us through to September, so we can continue to put the country's financial house in order. Democrats will do anything they can to shut down our government, and we can't let that happen. We have to remain united, no dissent. Fight for another day when the timing is right. Very important. Make America great again." The chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland, then posted to X, on top of President Trump's post, quote, "Congress must keep the government open so that DOJ can continue to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in our government. This continuing resolution is necessary to advance President Trump's agenda. I fully support it." End quote. For the record, Tea Party Patriots Action also supports the full-year CR. On Wednesday, Jenny Beth Martin released a statement that said, in part, quote, "I urge the Congress to pass a continuing resolution that funds the government at the FY 2024 levels for the duration of the fiscal year as President Trump supports. This represents a spending freeze. And while we look forward to working with the White House and the Congress in the coming weeks and months to fashion a reconciliation bill and a long-term budget plan that works toward the balanced budget President Trump said last night he wanted to achieve, we recognize that the time and place for the budget savings necessary to achieve a balanced budget will be found in other legislation and not in this continuing resolution," end quote. Passing this CR through both House and Senate isn't going to be easy. Speaker Johnson has a 218 to 214 majority, so he can only afford to lose one vote. The Senate is going to be even tougher. Even if all Republicans vote to end debate on the procedural motion, they'll still need help from at least 7 Democrats to get to the 60 votes needed. This is where it all gets interesting. If the House passes the funding bill and sends it to the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate will all vote to end debate on the measure, and it will be up to the Democrats in the Senate to decide whether or not to shut down the government. If the government shuts down, it will be because Democrats want it to. Stay tuned. And now finally to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 110 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped last Wednesday, featuring Jenny Beth's discussion with Clint Brown, president of American Path and former executive director of the Senate Steering Committee. Their discussion touches on Senate procedural tactics, backroom deals, and deep state obstruction impacting conservative priorities. They even explain the Senate's amendment tree and how the majority leader can use it to block other senators from offering amendments. As always, highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week. Now to the call to action. This week, we're focusing on balancing the budget. As we discussed earlier, in his speech last Tuesday night to the joint session of Congress, President Trump called for a government that spends wisely and puts American families first. Namely, he called for a balanced budget. For too long, Washington has run up massive debts, corrupting and growing the government, leaving future generations to pick up the tab. It's time to bring common sense back to our nation's finances. So we're urging Congress to heed the president's words and adopt a balanced budget. Doing so will reduce wasteful spending, prevent our national debt from growing any larger, bring transparency and accountability to our government, and secure a brighter financial future for every American. Tomorrow, we will launch an action page at our website, teapartypatriots.org. You will be able to follow that link to sign the petition, email a pre-written email, and connect with your members of Congress by telephone. Let's stand with President Trump in holding our elected officials accountable. As always, if you want to reach out to us, just send an email to jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. And if you want me to answer a question live on air, just put "for broadcast" in the subject line. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Until then, be well and be active.